The Colonel Parker was counting money in the back office of the International Hotel in Las Vegas when the door opened without a knock. 3 men in perfectly tailored suits walked in, and the largest one a man with calm, dangerous eyes sat down across from Parker's desk without being invited. "Colonel," the man said quietly, "my name is Bumpy Johnson, and we need to discuss your boy Elvis." Parker's blood ran cold. Everyone in the entertainment industry knew about Bumpy Johnson, the man who could make or break careers, the man who'd forced Frank Sinatra to change his entire approach to black musicians, the man who protected Harlem's interests in every major entertainment deal in America. "What about Elvis?" Parker asked, his Dutch accent thickening with nervousness. Bumpy smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. "Your boy has been stealing from my people for 10 years, getting rich off music he didn't create, taking credit for sounds that came from black churches and juke joints. Tonight, in front of 2,000 people, he's going to give credit where credit is due. Or tomorrow, every newspaper in America is going to learn some very interesting things about how the king of rock and roll really built his kingdom." The confrontation at the International Hotel was the culmination of a decade-long war between Bumpy Johnson and the Elvis Presley Machina war that began the moment Elvis stepped onto the Ed Sullivan Show in 1956 and became famous performing music that black artists had been creating for generations without recognition or reward. But to understand why Bumpy Johnson decided to humble Elvis Presley in front of 2,000 Las Vegas fans, you have to understand what happened to Big Joe Turner on a cold February night in 1955. Big Joe Turner was one of the founding fathers of rhythm and blues, a 300-pound giant with a voice that could shake buildings, and a stage presence that commanded respect from every musician who ever heard him perform. Turner had been performing shake, rattle, and roll at black clubs across the South for 2 years when a young white musician named Elvis Presley heard the song and decided to record his own version. Elvis's version of shake, rattle, and roll became a massive hit on white radio stations across America. But Elvis didn't just cover the song, he claimed it as his own creation, never mentioning Big Joe Turner, never giving credit to the black musicians who had created the sound, never sharing the profits that came from turning rhythm and blues into what white audiences would accept as rock and roll. Big Joe Turner died broke in 1956, watching a white kid from Memphis become rich and famous performing music that Turner had created. His funeral was attended by 12 people, while Elvis Presley was selling out arenas across America. Turner's death wasn't an isolated incident. Throughout the 1950s and early 1960s, Elvis built his career by taking songs, sounds, and styles that had been created by black musicians Little Richard, Chuck Berry, Big Mama Thornton, Arthur Crudup, and presenting them to white artists as his own innovations. The music industry called it crossover appeal. Black musicians called it theft. But Bumpy Johnson had been watching, documenting, and planning. By 1967, Bumpy had compiled detailed evidence of Elvis's pattern of musical appropriation. Over 40 songs that Elvis had recorded without giving credit to their original creators, millions of dollars in profits that should have been shared with black artists. and decades of interviews where Elvis presented himself as the originator of sounds that had come directly from black churches and blues clubs. More damaging was the evidence that Colonel Parker and Elvis's management team had deliberately sought out black musicians, recorded their performances, and then coached Elvis to recreate their styles without acknowledgement. It wasn't just cultural appropriation, it was systematic theft. But Bumpy knew that having evidence wasn't enough. Elvis was protected by powerful record labels by racial attitudes that assumed black musicians were less important than white ones, and by a fan base that preferred to believe their hero was an original genius rather than a talented imitator. To force Elvis to acknowledge his debt to black musicians, Bumpy would need leverage that even the king of rock and roll couldn't ignore. The leverage came in the form of photographs that should never have been taken. In 1964, during a private party at Elvis's Graceland mansion, someone had taken pictures of Elvis using racial slurs, mocking black musicians, and making jokes about the stupid uns whose music had made him rich. The photographs had been taken by a member of Elvis's inner circle who had become disgusted by what he witnessed and had quietly contacted Bumpy Johnson's organization. The photographs were devastating. They showed Elvis, surrounded by friends and hangers-on, laughing at crude imitations of black performers, using language that would destroy his career if it became public, and expressing contempt for the very people whose musical innovations had created his success. But Bumpy didn't want to destroy Elvis. He wanted to educate him. On August 15th, 1969, Elvis was scheduled to perform at the International Hotel in Las Vegas, his first live performance in 8 years. A comeback that was being billed as the most important concert of his career. 2,000 people had paid premium prices to see the King of Rock and Roll return to the stage. That afternoon, Bumpy Johnson walked into Elvis's dressing room. Elvis was alone, warming up his voice and preparing for the most important performance of his life. When he saw Bumpy, he went pale. "Mr. Presley," Bumpy said politely, "I think it's time we had a conversation. I don't know what you want, but I want you to tell the truth tonight. I want you to acknowledge the black musicians who created the music you've been performing. I want you to give credit where credit is due. Elvis's manager, Colonel Parker, rushed into the room. Elvis doesn't have to talk to you. Security will escort you out." Bumpy smiled. "Colonel, I think you should see these photographs before you make any threats." Bumpy placed a manila envelope on the dressing room table. Inside were the photos from Graceland Elvis using racial slurs, mocking black musicians, expressing contempt for the people whose music had made him famous. Elvis stared at the photographs, his face turning white. "Where did you get these?" "Someone who thought the world should know what you really think about the music you've built your career on. Someone who was tired of watching you get rich while black musicians died broke and forgotten." Colonel Parker studied the photographs, understanding immediately that they would destroy Elvis's career if they became public. "What do you want?" "I want Elvis to tell his audience tonight about the black musicians who influenced his music. I want him to acknowledge Big Mama Thornton, Arthur Crudup, and every other black artist he's borrowed from. And I want him to establish a fund that will provide financial support for aging rhythm and blues musicians who never received proper compensation for their contributions to rock and roll. That's impossible, Parker said. Elvis's audience doesn't want to hear about. Elvis's audience needs to hear the truth. And if they don't hear it from Elvis tonight, they'll read about it in every newspaper in America tomorrow. Along with these photographs, Elvis sat down heavily, staring at the pictures of himself using language and expressing attitudes that would horrify his fans. What exactly do you want me to say? I want you to tell the truth. I want you to explain to your audience that rock and roll was created by black musicians who deserve recognition and respect. I want you to apologize for taking credit for music you didn't create. And I want you to kneel right there on stage and ask forgiveness from every black musician who contributed to your success. Kneel. In front of 2,000 people? In front of 2,000 people. Because that's what humility looks like, Mr. Presley. And humility is something you've never shown to the people who made your career possible. At 9 p.m. on August 15th, 1969, Elvis Presley walked onto the stage at the International Hotel in Las Vegas. 2,000 fans erupted in applause for the return of the king of rock and roll. But Elvis's opening words stunned everyone in the audience. "Ladies and gentlemen," Elvis said, his voice shaking slightly, "before I perform tonight, I need to tell you something that I should have said years ago." The audience quieted, expecting some kind of personal revelation or career announcement. Rock and roll wasn't invented by me. It wasn't invented by any white musician. Rock and roll was created by black musicians, men like Chuck Berry, Little Richard, Big Mama Thornton, Crudup. These artists developed the sounds, the styles, and the songs that became the foundation of everything you know as rock and roll music. Murmurs rippled through the audience. This wasn't what they had expected from Elvis's comeback performance. For the past 10 years, I've performed their music, used their innovations, and built my career on their creativity. But I never gave them the credit they deserved. I never shared the success that should have been theirs. And for that, I need to apologize. Elvis paused, looking out at the confused faces in the audience. Then he did something that no major entertainer had ever done before. He got down on his knees in front of 2,000 people. "I'm kneeling tonight for every black musician who died without recognition, for every artist who was denied the success they earned, for every person who created something beautiful and watched someone else get famous for it. I'm asking forgiveness from the real creators of rock and roll. And I'm promising to do better." The kneeling lasted 30 seconds, but it changed the music industry forever. Elvis stayed on his knees as he continued, "Starting tonight, I'm establishing the Memphis Music Foundation, which will provide financial support and recognition for aging rhythm and blues musicians. And from now on, every song I perform will include acknowledgement of its original creators." When Elvis finally stood up, the audience was silent. Then, slowly, applause began, not the wild enthusiasm that usually greeted Elvis, but respectful recognition of something unprecedented. Elvis performed for 2 hours that night, but before each song, he explained its origins, credited its black creators, and shared stories about the musicians who had influenced his style. It was the most educational concert in rock and roll history. After the show, Elvis met privately with Bumpy Johnson. "I've done what you asked," Elvis said quietly. "The photographs will never see the light of day," Bumpy replied. "You kept your word, Mr. Presley. I'll keep mine. Why did you do this?" "You could have destroyed me with those pictures." Bumpy looked at Elvis for a long moment. "Because destroying you wouldn't help the musicians who created this music. But humbling you, educating you, forcing you to acknowledge where your success really came from, that honors their memory and creates something positive from years of injustice." The Memphis Music Foundation, established with Elvis's initial donation of $500,000, provided financial support for aging rhythm and blues musicians for the next 40 years. Chuck Berry, Little Richard, and dozens of other artists received recognition and compensation that had been denied to them for decades. Elvis's career continued, but it was different. He consistently credited the black musicians who had influenced his work, shared profits with surviving artists and their estates, and used his platform to educate audiences about the real history of rock and roll. More importantly, other white musicians began following Elvis's example. The Rolling Stones, Led Zeppelin, and Eric Clapton all started acknowledging their debt to black blues and rhythm and blues musicians, sharing profits and providing recognition that had been overdue for decades. The night Elvis Presley knelt on stage in Las Vegas became a turning point in American music history, not because of the kneeling itself, but because of what it represented: acknowledgement, respect, and justice for artists who had been systematically exploited by an industry that valued their creativity but not their humanity. Bumpy Johnson never spoke publicly about his role in Elvis's transformation. When asked about rumors that he had forced the king of rock and roll to apologize to black musicians, Bumpy would simply say, "Sometimes talented people need to be reminded that talent doesn't exist in a vacuum. Everything we create builds on what came before us, and we owe recognition to those who laid the foundation." Big Joe Turner was already dead by the time Elvis knelt in Las Vegas, but Turner's widow received a check for $50,000 from the Memphis Music Foundation, along with a personal letter from Elvis acknowledging her husband's contributions to rock and roll. The letter ended with a line that Elvis would repeat for the rest of his career: "Your husband didn't just influence my music. He created the foundation that made my music possible. I'm sorry it took me so long to say thank you." On August 15th, 1969, the king of rock and roll knelt before 2,000 people and acknowledged that he had built his kingdom on someone else's land. It was the most honest moment of his career, and the moment when American popular music began to reckon with its debt to the black artists who had created it. The man who forced that moment of truth was a gangster from Harlem who understood that real power isn't the ability to destroy your enemies, it is the wisdom to transform them into allies of justice.